A new round of SOE reform. Xi Jinping gets what he wants, but China's economic vitality will die. This is the Jersey News Commentary Channel. Recently, China has once again launched a massive new round of state-owned enterprise SOE reform. From central SOEs to local SOEs, from energy, military industries, and telecommunications to artificial intelligence, chips, new energy, and biotechnology, slogans such as deepening reform, strategic restructuring, focusing on core responsibilities and core businesses, and developing new quality productive forces have once again appeared intensively. On the surface, this may look like another round of economic reform. But if you observe carefully, you will find that this so-called reform is not reform at all. Rather, it is a deeper level of economic absorption and state consolidation. In my view, the overall goal of this new round of SOE reform can actually be summarized in 6 Chinese characters: consolidate, expand, eliminate. And once this path is taken to its logical conclusion, China's economy will not be reborn. Instead, it may completely lose its last remaining vitality. This round of SOE reform is about consolidation, expansion, and elimination. Official documents describe this new round of SOE reform in grand and dignified terms, using phrases such as focusing on core responsibilities and core businesses, strategic restructuring and specialized integration, and optimizing the layout of state-owned capital. Some people may interpret focusing on core responsibilities and core businesses to mean that SOEs will gradually retreat from certain sectors and make room for private enterprises. I can only say you are thinking too much. The reality is exactly the opposite. The so-called core responsibilities and core businesses: energy, military industries, telecommunications, transportation, food, finance, infrastructure, and so on have always been firmly controlled by SOEs and have never truly been opened up. This reform merely makes the method of control even more centralized. Beyond that, SOEs are now aggressively moving into fields such as artificial intelligence, quantum technology, semiconductors, advanced manufacturing, biotechnology, computing power, and data centers, the so-called sectors of new quality productive forces. This represents a broad and forceful expansion. Some analysts estimate that the total annual investment into these sectors exceeds 10 trillion renminbi. At the same time, SOEs are opening their mouths wide to swallow many high-quality private companies trapped in difficult situations. Through joint ventures, partnerships, acquisitions, and state capital injections, they have absorbed a large number of private enterprises. To put it bluntly, this is the elimination of the most dynamic forces within the private sector. Therefore, what the authorities call strategic restructuring increasingly resembles an industrial reshuffle. Profitable and controllable businesses are kept. Zombie SOEs drowning in debt and incapable of generating profits are discarded like rotten apples. Meanwhile, promising and competitive private firms are quietly taken over. In other words, preserve the strategic lifelines, throw away the mess, and absorb the essence. Is this market-oriented reform? No. This is a reshuffling, regrouping, and reallocation of state capital. Mixed ownership reform is essentially a special tax on private enterprises. After 2013, the Chinese Communist Party aggressively promoted what it called mixed ownership reform. To this day, the process is still ongoing. Officially, the rhetoric sounded noble: introduce private capital, improve governance structures, raise efficiency, inject vitality into SOEs, and make them more market-oriented. But what actually happened? What is the truth? A Zhejiang entrepreneur once told me something deeply revealing. Back then, I thought I was becoming a shareholder. Later, I realized I was merely someone paying money. This businessman had participated in the mixed ownership reform of a large SOE. Before the investment, everything sounded promising: joint governance, boardroom decision-making, and market-oriented operations. But once the money went in, reality emerged. Although private investors technically had seats on the board, nobody listened to what private business owners had to say. Even if you offered excellent suggestions, no one paid attention. Over time, people simply fell silent. Eventually, he no longer even dared to make suggestions. Because within the SOE system, politics comes first. Connections matter far more than management competence. Speak too much, and you are likely to offend people. In the end, he said helplessly, I just treated it as paying a special kind of tax. In reality, many major private entrepreneurs are not unaware of the darkness behind the system. Many knowingly walk into the trap. Knowing full well there are tigers in the mountain, they still head toward Tiger Mountain. Why? Because they understand clearly, once the state calls your name, if you refuse to show respect, trouble will inevitably follow. Today it may be environmental inspections. Tomorrow, fire safety checks. The day after, tax investigations. Later, perhaps data security reviews, financial supervision, platform crackdowns, and so on. As a result, many companies ultimately choose to pay for peace. Therefore, so-called mixed ownership reform often resembles little more than a redistribution of resources disguised as reform. To speak bluntly, it becomes a form of conscious or unconscious tax payment and political tribute. Why is this round of SOE reform happening now? One question deserves serious reflection. Why is this new round of SOE reform taking place specifically between 2026 and 2029? Why not 5 years ago? Why not 10 years ago? Because the prey has weakened. After 3 years of pandemic controls, many private enterprises were severely weakened. Then came the real estate collapse, persistently weak consumption, massive youth unemployment, the organized withdrawal of foreign capital, supply chain relocation, and intensifying internal competition. Profits for large numbers of private businesses have collapsed. In recent years, many private enterprises have not been making money at all, they have simply been struggling to survive. Meanwhile, costs for energy, raw materials, land, financing, and logistics have continued to rise. And the upstream resources remain largely controlled by SOEs. On top of that, water, electricity, and gas prices have all been rising across the board. In some regions, price increases have exceeded 50%. At the same time, financing for private firms has become increasingly difficult. The market has grown colder. Private businesses are finding survival ever more difficult. Many business owners truly can no longer hold on. And precisely at this moment, state capital has begun moving aggressively. Strategic investments. State-owned equity participation. Bailout funds. Resource integration. Mergers and acquisitions. On the surface, the message sounds warm and reassuring, helping companies through hard times, supporting the real economy, preserving private management autonomy, avoiding interference in operations, even offering generous valuations. It all sounds compassionate. But many private business owners understand perfectly well what is happening. This is pressure to surrender their companies. How could anyone willingly let go of a business built over decades with blood, sweat, and sacrifice? But reality leaves few choices. Rather than being slowly drained to death and tortured into collapse, selling may at least preserve part of one's wealth. And so, one silent takeover after another unfolds quietly, wrapped in grief. This is not market competition eliminating weak firms. This is state capital taking advantage of crisis to expand while the house is on fire. New quality productive forces in the future. SOEs intend to monopolize more than coal, electricity, and steel. In the past, SOEs monopolized coal, electricity, steel, cement, railways, oil, and banking. Today, they are moving aggressively into artificial intelligence, quantum technology, semiconductors, advanced manufacturing, biotechnology, computing power, and data centers. In other words, in the past the Chinese Communist Party controlled steel and concrete. In the future, it also seeks to control algorithms and data. This means that China's most profitable, most strategic, and most valuable industries will become increasingly state-controlled. Officially, the justification is clear: strengthening national control, enhancing national security, improving strategic capability. But the logic of a market economy says something very different. Innovation depends on competition. Technology depends on trial and error. Entrepreneurship depends on freedom, not administrative orders. Historically, nearly every genuine technological revolution has emerged from relatively free competition. Silicon Valley was not centrally planned. The Internet was not born from government directives. Artificial intelligence was not created by administrative command. When political logic overwhelms market logic, technology increasingly turns into campaign-style science and technology. Today, a campaign for chips. Tomorrow, robots. The day after, brain-computer interfaces. And eventually, innovation becomes little more than satellite launch-style achievements, grandiose displays designed more for political spectacle than genuine breakthroughs. Private enterprises create the 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, while SOEs controlling 90% of resources contribute only a fraction. For years, the Chinese Communist Party has taken great pride in the size of state-owned assets. Recently, state media reported that state-owned assets have reached more than 90 trillion renminbi, approaching 100 trillion renminbi, as if this alone represents national strength. But if you face reality directly, can you still feel proud? China's own official figures have long acknowledged that the private economy contributes more than 50% of tax revenue, more than 60% of GDP, more than 70% of technological innovation, more than 80% of urban employment, more than 90% of all enterprises. This is the widely discussed 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 phenomenon of China's private sector. And yet SOEs, which control the overwhelming majority of resources, contribute less than 30% of tax revenue, less than 10% of employment, and only limited technological innovation with technological sophistication, often difficult to praise. Even more absurdly, for a very long time, SOEs contributed almost no profits to the state beyond taxes. Only after entering the 21st century were they required to hand over roughly 5% of profits annually. And only this year has the requirement reportedly risen to 35% of profits. What kind of absurd arrangement is this? It is like a family where the eldest son controls most of the wealth, contributes almost nothing to the household, yet the struggling younger siblings are expected to shoulder enormous responsibilities. Where is the fairness in that? Moreover, most SOE profits come not from genuine competitiveness, but from monopolies over natural resources and administrative privileges: banking, oil, telecommunications, tobacco, energy, railways, and land. These sectors have never truly participated in free market competition. If private enterprises enjoyed the same access to natural resources, credit, and policy advantages, what would the results look like? A friend of mine works in private equity investment and is also an economics professor at Fudan University. He once told me something unforgettable: the annual return on state-owned capital today is not even 5%. If I managed these SOEs, I could hand over double the profits to the state and still make enormous amounts of money. I was deeply shocked when I heard this. And I still remember it vividly. So when people proudly celebrate more than 90 trillion renminbi in state-owned assets, I cannot help but ask, are you simply ignorant? Or are you knowingly pretending not to see the truth? What does Xi Jinping really want? Many people may ask, hasn't the Chinese Communist Party always talked about reform and opening up? Hasn't it repeatedly emphasized support for the private economy? So why is it once again resorting to what can only be described as a performative show of admiration for something it does not truly love? Remember this: do not listen to what it says. Watch what it does. Officially, the authorities still emphasize the principle of the two unwavering commitments supporting both the public and private sectors. But the reality is increasingly clear: the party controls everything. At the very core of SOE reform lies one principle above all others: the party decides. Power decides. Not capital. And certainly not the market. In fact, even before this new round of SOE reform, China's platform economy had already undergone a sweeping regulatory storm. Alibaba was fined 18.228 billion renminbi. Meituan was fined 3.442 billion renminbi. Didi was fined 8.026 billion renminbi. Tencent and Baidu also faced repeated regulatory penalties. Capital expansion was hammered by the administrative iron fist. Ant Group's IPO was abruptly halted, wiping out what could have been a market financing event worth over 2 trillion renminbi. Didi was ordered to relocate its databases back to mainland China. Meanwhile, private financial services were rectified, and Alipay has, in practice, come under state capital influence and control. In short, state capital is once again taking command of industry. The pace of the state advances, the private sector retreats has become larger, more coordinated, and more unwavering. Why? Because in Xi Jinping's logic, security outweighs efficiency. Control outweighs growth. Stability outweighs the market. The market is merely a tool. Power is the core. And at the center of that core lies the system of one-man rule. Xi's determination to tightly control SOEs has little to do with so-called national security. National security is largely a slogan, a convenient justification, a political veil. Are private enterprises inherently less secure? Are not many of the world's most advanced military technologies produced by private companies? America's F-35 stealth fighter jets. Japan's advanced submarines. Germany's Leopard tanks. France's Airbus aerospace technologies. Are these not highly sophisticated strategic assets? And what about SpaceX? A private company founded by Elon Musk has launched more than 10,000 Starlink satellites, exceeding the combined total of many countries around the world. Are these systems somehow unsafe? How should this be explained? In one sentence, today's new round of SOE reform is no longer the market-oriented reform of the Zhu Rongji era. Back then, policies such as grasp the large, let go of the small and re-employment after layoffs, though at times blunt and painful, were moving in the direction of allowing markets to grow and expand. Today's direction is very different. The goal now is to bring the state back to center stage. To let the party control everything. To let Xi alone hold ultimate authority. To push the market into the corner. And to place power firmly in the chairman's seat. From this perspective, this round of SOE reform is not economic reform. It is political reconstruction. The market is merely the instrument. Control is the true objective. When state capital swallows the market, the economy loses its life. A nation's real vitality has never depended on the sheer size of state-owned assets. It depends on whether entrepreneurship and innovation still exist. Whether free competition and fair expectations still exist. Whether entrepreneurs still possess confidence and creative spirit. Therefore, this new round of SOE reform represents a milestone in Xi Jinping's broader the state advances, the private sector retreats project. And it signals the possibility that China's economic vitality may be systematically weakened and ultimately sterilized.